Hello, 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 beautiful people. I am so excited to be back with you. And I know I say that every time because I'm excited every time. I wouldn't do it if I didn't enjoy it. I wouldn't come here and spend time with you guys if I didn't enjoy it. And I absolutely love this. I have been loving the Triumph Together Challenge. We are in week 5 of the Triumph Together Challenge, and every week has been a banger. Like, I am serious. Every week has been a banger. It's been such a great experience. And I told you guys when I took on this opportunity to participate in this anthology, I had a whole different set of objectives. I wanted to stretch myself as a writer. I wanted to really focus on being in a space where I was writing for a specific type of audience now. That was a big adjustment for me. But when I tell you that this experience has not only just stretched me and allowed me to grow in such a tremendous way, that I'm really grateful for, but it's also just given me this new community of brilliant, talented individuals who are operating in all sectors, whether it's nonprofit leadership, whether it's entrepreneurship, government, corporate America, academia, you name it, they are all over. So this has been a great experience for me in just expanding my own horizons. And I have said it before, but I'm going to say it again. I enjoy not being the smartest person in the room. I want to be in a room with other people that have strengths where I am weak and vice versa, so that there are really strong opportunities for us to collaborate and to be able to grow together. And that has been exactly what this experience has been. So we'll talk more about that at the end of the Triumph Together Challenge. And before I bring my amazing guest up, I want to make sure that you all are reminded that you can still participate in the Triumph Together Challenge. Each chapter in Triumph in the Trenches, Navigating Success for Black Professionals, and I'm going to hold the book up for all of you who are watching us live. She's a gorgeous hardback book. You absolutely want to add her to your collection. And you have to purchase a copy in order to participate in the challenge. So there's only 3 things required to participate in the challenge. Number 1, you have to buy a copy of the book. That's easy. You can run over to my website at gemsforthejourney.org/triumph to grab your copy. 2, you have to be following me on LinkedIn. 3, you have to sign up for the Career Gems for the Journey newsletter. So the newsletter is where you're going to find all of the updates for the Triumph Together Challenge. And it is a cultivated, curated set of resources specifically for those who have signed up. So that's content that I'm not sharing on other platforms. It's specifically for that newsletter community. So all you have to do in order to participate in the challenge is those 3 things. It's simple. And you can join us this week, next week, and we still have another few weeks of this challenge. So I would love for more people to be able to participate. So if you're joining us live or you're watching this on the replay, you know how I feel. If you're live, I love you being here and the vibes that you're going to bring. And if you're watching this on the replay, I love that for you too. And I love it for me. The replay has been doing amazing things. So I know that that love has been really real, and I'm excited for that. But now I'm going to get right into my guest. I've done all my housekeeping. You guys know I like to run fast once I get excited. And I have such an amazing guest that I cannot hold back anymore. I have Dr. Mary Darden Robinson, who is joining me today. And I'm going to bring her up to stage. She is a phenomenal, phenomenal co-author on this anthology. And I am going to read her bio for a second, and then she is going to join us in this conversation. She is the author of Chapter 10. So Dr. Mary Darden Robinson is leveraging 20 plus years as a private sector therapist, overall wellness and resilience for Hampton Roads adolescents and families across community settings, lending her expertise in program assessment, evaluation, and strategic planning to guide behavioral health organizations. Her eclectic style grounds in CBT and MI. So welcome, 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 Dr. Mary Darden Robinson. I'm so excited to have you. Dr. Mary, can you still hear me? Can you hear me? You can't hear me. Okay. Maybe we're having a little bit of a technical bug here. Let me just double check and see. You can hear me now. Okay. Dr. Mary, you mind saying something so I can make sure that we can hear you on the other end? No, you're not coming through. So I'm not hearing your audio. Let's just make sure we have all of our mics where they need to be. Um, Try one more time. No luck. So maybe drop out of the stream and you can join us back. And then I'll just give the update on your chapter while you're doing that. So while Dr. Mary is going to rejoin us on the chat, we're going to give her a moment. And the crazy part is, see, this is how you know the conversation is about to be fire, because we did an audio check before we got on live and it was perfect. It was exceptional. So I have no doubt that we're going to be back in a second, and Dr. Mary is going to be a phenomenal guest. And you guys know that I've had quite a few folks thus far from the anthology on the LinkedIn Live, but we've also had other guests on our platform. And we're streaming directly to LinkedIn Live as well as to YouTube. And I absolutely love calling people doctor. I like, especially women, especially Black women. I love, love, love calling them doctor, because I have spent a lot of time in corporate America and I have a group of amazing clients. And I know how hard it is to get to that level of academic success, to make that kind of commitment to one specific topic, and to be able to get to the place where you can actually call yourself doctor. So I love, love, love calling Black women, especially doctor. And that's never going to get old for me. But I'll tell you, I gave Dr. Mary's intro, and while she's going to come back and join us, you guys would have seen, if you are following me on LinkedIn, you would have seen my posts yesterday, because Dr. Mary brings up such an important topic in her chapter 10. How is it that I constantly got a seat at the table, but no voice in the discussion? How is it that I constantly got a seat at the table, but no voice in the discussion? So she talks about a concept that I found no one else has covered in the way she covered it. So I was just like, okay, all right, I'm listening. You have my attention. So she talks about this idea of a placeholder phenomenon. And in that placeholder phenomenon, I was completely blown away by that language. So Dr. Mary, are you there? Can you hear us?
I am. Are you able to hear me?
I am. I can hear you. Thank you so much for coming back on. I appreciate you taking the time to do the extra tech in the background. And I was just talking to our live audience just to help them understand. I love calling Black women doctor, because I realize how much work, effort, time, energy, money, sweat, blood, tears went into building out that academic credential. So talk to me just a little bit about what your relationship is with being called doctor, because I know everybody has different feelings about it. I personally love saying it. Do you love hearing it as much as I love saying it, or is there more to the story?
There's definitely more to the story. So thank you for asking that question. For me, it's incredibly important because it's been a goal of mine to obtain a doctoral degree. And for a long period of time, my mother and my parents, always told me, get your education. When you get your education, it's one of the things I mentioned in the chapter. Nobody can take it from you. And so I was completely not pulsing on the fact that I would come into a world, a field that's a helping field, and experience the complete disregard and purposeful refusal to contact someone or to, engage with someone based on what their particular title is. And so after being the invisible doctor for probably about 2 years, I really struggled with redirecting folks and really explaining the importance of how that really can be incredibly disrespectful, down to people saying, I'm going to call you Dr. Mary. I'm not going to call you by your last name, because that at least makes you feel like a part of the team. And I was like, okay, so you'll give me the doctor, but you don't want to call me by my last name. Like what's with that? So there's a lot behind a name, and coming from the mental health field itself, we have spent a lot of time talking about pronouns and talking about, making sure that we respect people's choice and how they want to be referred to. And so there's a whole long story behind why the doctor is so incredibly important.
So I actually love that you made that mention of working in a mental health field, a helping profession, but also just this idea of, I personally struggle all the time with, what does it cost you to identify someone as the way they want to be identified? It costs you nothing. So I really don't understand the argument, the battle, the pushback back and forth. If you tell me you want to be called Dr. Mary Darden Robinson, it costs me nothing. It costs me nothing to say the syllables. It costs me nothing to acknowledge, but it's so valuable to the person who you properly name, who you properly identify, who you properly acknowledge. It's definitely a very one-dimensional,
Mhm.
suppressive way to behave, in my opinion, when you intentionally misidentify someone, and in whatever way, whether it's misgendering them, misidentifying them by name, misacknowledging something in from a title standpoint. So I'm glad that we're talking about it, because for me it's a problem that should not exist. And the more
Mhm.
people join this idea of resisting it, it is necessary for people like us to make sure that we acknowledge that it is a problem. And it's a
Mhm.
problem in a lot of settings, in workplaces, in companies, and in organizations, in academia, potentially even. But we are doing our best, right, to do the right thing, because it costs us nothing and it's so valuable to the other person. It's just the right thing to do as a human. Like, it's just the right thing to do as a
Absolutely.
human.
And I mean, coming from a help and feel, imagine, you only get grace, but so far, right? And so when you're doing it intentionally, which is to use the terminology that you use, there's not a mystery around, why someone is purposely calling me Mary when I've clearly identified that my name is Dr. Mary and not
Mm-hmm.
Mary. I've even redirected people in the moment. I'm kind of eclectic, and I've been my entire life. As I get older, I just get more and more eclectic and more ridiculous.
I love it.
um, but there's a lot to be said about that, and authenticity, and being able to walk in the shoes that I walk in from a standpoint of people, purposely, like you said, and intentionally not using the title. And like you said, it costs nothing. Imagine
Absolutely.
how much trouble I would be in if I did that with a client, but because I'm a professional, people feel that they can navigate around and scoot around and kind of get away with it. And so I also lend it in a different way really quickly, and then I'll turn it back over to you. But a really good example. So in a prior life, I was supervising a pretty large practice, mental health and substance use inclined, and I had a team member that I was responsible for supervising. And this gentleman had his doctoral degree in divinity. He did not look like I look. And so one of the individuals that looked as he did, because he was a Caucasian male, made it a point. This was one that refused to contact me by Dr. Mary, made it a point to explain to me that this gentleman's name was Dr. Such and Such. And so the purpose was to see if there was this hierarchy, and I wouldn't do it because the
Mm-hmm.
gentleman worked under my supervision. And I took that as an opportunity just to show I will Mr. and Mrs. you to death, as well as I will go with your title. And so I went to him, had a very candid conversation. And from then on, he was Dr. Such and Such. It has
Mm-hmm.
nothing to do with the background portion of who's in leadership and who's not. And so I pray that in that opportunity, I was able to kind of spin and change the narrative, which was it's a thing of arrogance, when that may not be the case.
Hmm. So I just let's this is already a gem, right? We haven't even gotten into the chapter specifically, and you're already dropping gems. So first, let's be very clear. I misidentifying someone by accident unintentionally only
Mhm.
is an excuse that can be sustained for so long.
Correct.
So if you are one of those type of people who are working in darkness, right? Like really on some nonsense and creating unnecessary hardship in your workplace, in your environment, whatever you work in, we know, right? We are very aware that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. And we also know that this is a you problem. This is
Hmm.
not a us problem, right? This is not Dr. Mary Darden Robinson does not need to fix you, does not need to coach you or develop you on how to properly identify her and how to use her name and credentials properly. That's not her responsibility. And I'm speaking for Dr. Mary in this equation, because I'm speaking to
Hmm.
everyone who is doing this, not to Dr. Mary, but to whoever in your workplace, however people want to be identified. It is a basic human decency to identify them as such, because that's what they asked for. Hard stop. Not for any reason. Who cares how you feel about it or what you need? You should talk to your therapist about how you feel about it, but you should
Absolutely.
go and do the thing that is the right thing to be done. And that is a sign of inclusion, and it's a
Hmm.
sign of equity, right? And Dr. Mary shouldn't have to ask you more than once if Dr. So and so hasn't asked you more than once. So that was a little public announcement for anybody who was here. We didn't know we were going to go this way today, but we're going to ride the way the conversation takes us because there's so many things for Dr. Mary and I to cover. So talk to me just a little bit about, we talked about the anthology, The Triumph in the Trenches. We're here for Challenge Week 5. You wrote chapter 10.
Yeah.
So, and your chapter title is how is it that I'm constantly got a seat at the table, but no voice in the discussion? So that title, I think, forming your title as a question, right, is already, what's happening here? Tell us more. But I'd love to have your perspective as a doctor of psychology, right? Someone who literally works in the helping field, but also knows about human behavior and knows about how the human brain and those relationships function. What are we missing right now in the conversation that we think that this anthology is going to help bring light to? What's been missing in the conversation about success and career success broadly?
Well, I think what's been missing is just the idea that the relationship between an employee and an employer are reciprocal. And so one of the things that I immediately think of is, and I think Coach Barnes mentioned this before, like every job employer has their own handbook, if you say, right? And so we need to also have a handbook based on what our expectations and guidelines are. And so what I've had to most recently really consider is how do you navigate having that discussion? Because when you first come to your place of employment, and anytime that there's a misalignment or a concern or discussion pertaining to performance, that is, just as Coach Barnes said, one of the first things they pull out immediately. Okay, well, let's talk about the code of conduct. However, that goes both ways.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that, you expect me to be, respectful, trustworthy, and honest, transparent. But on the other side of that, you can turn around and not, afford me the same expectation. And so I think that is one of the larger pieces that we don't spend enough time really talking about. Also, authenticity. So everyone is different. For a good period of my career, even if I think back to high school, I had a teacher tell me, you will never make it in college. That is how I became Dr. Anybody, because I realized after, doing my own exploration and actually getting trained in EMDR, which is a incredibly dope intervention. And I can talk a little bit about that, but it really is looking at reprocessing like past traumas. And in order to be trained in this particular area, guess what they make you do? They make you process one of your traumas, which I thought was brilliant because, again, as a therapist or a clinician, I do more work in the administrative sector now, but I'm trained as a clinician. How can I tell you what you should be doing, right? So far as how you navigate life, if I can't even admit that there's a way that I could be interacting differently. And so I just love how they force you into processing some of those things. But that helped me to realize before even the initials came, I was always a person that people thought she's not going to get there. Oh, it took her 2 times to get her license, or I had to do supervision more than once because, it was a whole bunch of issues with the board. And so I was always the person that everyone always thought, okay, she's talking and she's not going to push through. And at the end of the day, I've been that person that's been standing there. It might take me 2 times as amount of time it might have taken you, but just the idea of the comeback is just dope. And so no one has given me anything but a hard time to become Dr. such and such. But I learned that after, having that experience, that I was chasing all of these credentials to become accepted within my field and to be seen as knowledgeable, only to realize that I would be the invisible doctor. I wasn't even tracking that would be something that I would be focusing on at all, because I felt, get the initials, everything else comes with it. And that's not always the case.
Okay. So you're busting this thing wide open. So first you mentioned code of conduct, and we want to acknowledge Coach Barnes, right, for coming up with that idea. There's a concept that I use often in dialogue with my clients, and it's, are you in a mutually beneficial relationship with your employer?
Love it.
And mutually beneficial relationships look a certain way, but they also feel a certain way. There's a certain experience that comes along with it. So when we talk about that code of conduct and what are your must-haves, what are your needs, what are the important things that are necessary, I think a lot of people, I love that you brought that up because a lot of people aren't doing that work up front to decide what it is that they need. A lot of us are going into environments
Mm-hmm.
and then realizing after we're in the environment that it's not a good fit. And that's an experience, right? That's a lived experience that may be necessary for some of us. But what I love to encourage folks to do, especially as they're going through the anthology and really hearing all of these really firsthand accounts of different experiences, is to take the time to do the work to say, what does a mutually beneficial relationship with my employer look
Mm-hmm.
like? What does it look like in the way that I'm treated, in the way that I'm titled, in the way that I'm acknowledged, in the way that I'm compensated, in the way that I work? So I love that you brought that up and really wanted to just pull that out as a gem for folks. What does a mutually beneficial relationship with your employer look like? And, Dr. Coach Barnes talks about this code of conduct and you
Mm-hmm.
writing out your own code of conduct because your employer has one. But you also talked about this idea of doing all this work, getting extra credentials, doing the projects, going the extra mile in pursuit of acceptance, in pursuit of belonging within an organization or within a company. And I think so many people are experiencing this where they're doing the things, they're digging themselves out of difficult situations time and time again, hoping for this overall final acceptance that there will be an arrival. So
Mm-hmm.
just talk to me a little bit more about your realization now where you are, and you pursued all these very illustrious, very accomplished titles, and you got to all of them. So where are you
Thank
on your
you.
perspective of, do you believe what the next phase will look like for you is tied to all of those titles? Or has acceptance eluded you in your professional pursuits? Because before you answer, I believe that normal is overrated. I believe we spend a lot of time telling people how to behave in a way that's
Mm-hmm.
normal, but I think that normal is kind of a trap for a lot of us. And we end up in this trying to fit in, trying to conform, and it diminishes our own authenticity. So just talk to me about your experience in your pursuit of acceptance.
Absolutely. I think you brought up a few very, very good points. And so, as I was sharing earlier, I spent a good percentage of my career trying to figure out how I could um, tone down because I got a lot of that. So, people that would coach or talk with me, even people that cared about me, would be like, well, do you have to do that extra thing? So,
Mm-hmm.
typically, I have these ridiculous fingernails, the hair, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been that way my entire life. And
Yeah.
people have come up with all these expectations of who they think I am, so much so based off of what the appearance and the outside looks like that it's hilarious. So I'll give you another kind of like example. I grew up military. I attended private school for 3 years of my life, and I wasn't even born in the United States, right? So for a long time, I was used to living a military lifestyle. And as a military young person, you love everybody that loves you. You don't even really realize that there's a difference until someone says to you, like, why do you talk like that? Why do you sound like that? And
Mm-hmm.
so the first place that I learned that I was different, and this is probably going to heat up some of my family, but was my family. You speak differently. You do all these things kind of different based off of my experience from living abroad.
Mm-hmm.
And so I say that to say that when I go into a new job and they do the whole, okay, let's get to know you, people always struggle with which thing I am on the card. They'll come up with all these other ones, and I'm like, nope, that's not me. Nope, that's not me. And then I
Mm-hmm.
say, well, I went to private school for 3 years. And then I say, I went to a private Catholic school. And they're like, what? No idea. But that's because you look at me and you've already decided who I am. When you are eclectic, this is another good point that I want to make. People don't realize you've been eclectic usually all your life. So you smell it up the street, down the corner, and like from 15 miles away. I can tell in 5 seconds when I shake your hand what you're thinking about me based on having to navigate that throughout my professional and personal life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if we could get to a place where we would be willing to utilize more empathy, and I think Ms. Glennis, I think, mentioned that earlier on in your conversations. Empathy doesn't cost you anything. And so I think that we've got to come from a place of understanding that it's not always about what you say, it's about what you say, it's about how you behave, all of those different portions. And so authenticity is really important. But I don't think, to get back to your question, that acceptance has eluded me. I am a firm believer in that everything happens for a reason. Even the way I got involved in this anthology was just, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. Um, real quick, I had started to write about my life and my experiences, because I had experienced this diversity desert workspace where I was one mascot, one individual that was to communicate to everyone else at this agency, wherever I was working at, really valued diversity when it was all just a dirty, rotten, underhanded trick. It was not what really was going on, but it was the perception. And so I would be hired over and over again for the perception, only to be backdoored. We don't want to hear you talk. We just want people to see you so we can say, I think someone else called it the diversity hire, right? So we can say that we're open to, all different races and different types of folks, when it was really the mascot phenomenon. You really just want to make it look like that. So I decided, okay, well, I can't just keep, sitting here in this. And then I read I'm Not Yelling by Elizabeth Leva. And I was like, oh my goodness, there's other people that are experiencing this. And that book just opened my eyes to the point where I said, I've gotta do something. So let me start writing. And then this opportunity opened up. And as you know, she was a cornerstone to this particular project. And I knew it was right. And in
Yeah.
finishing the chapter, I realized maybe that there's a pivot for me. I don't think that acceptance has eluded me. I think I've been looking in the wrong tribe, the wrong area, the wrong community. There's a community for me. I might just have to create it or find it.
100%. So I love that. I love because you're giving somebody else who is struggling in their workplace, in their environment. You're setting them free by acknowledging that there is the right thing for you. It just may not be where you are at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be completely different than what you assume it should
Mm-hmm.
be. And so much of what we're doing oftentimes in career is looking for a place where we will be accepted, where we will be celebrated and not tolerated. And oftentimes, many workplaces haven't done the work on the other end. So we're going in with the perception that the organization should be further along in the way they
Mm-hmm.
behave, the way that they show up, but the evidence just isn't there. There are some great organizations that are doing the right things, but there are lots of organizations that are just not. And doing the work to try to find an organization that fits is an ongoing right work as you evolve, because as you call it eclectic and I call it unique, right? Like I enjoy individuality. I enjoy the benefit of people being different because our differences are our superpowers in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of scenarios, especially when you're dealing directly with the public, right? Like your relatability and your approachability will be hands down easier for certain people in the public to be able to gravitate towards. And if we could use our differences as our power to be able to serve or to be able to grow the bottom line for organizations that have a vision for it, the world would just be a different place. So I love that you mentioned that you're seeking out your own community, and now even at this stage in your career you're continuing to pursue that. I agree with you, your tribe is out there. But you use the term diversity desert. And I was like, ooh, when I heard you say it the first time, I was like, I'm gonna let that one slide. But we have to get into it. Two things you mentioned that I want you to talk more about. One is a diversity desert, and the other one was this idea of the placeholder phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the placeholder. I love the language. I love how you framed it. A lot of times we may also call that tokenism
Mm-hmm.
when you actually do get into the role. So I know that they have some overlap, diversity deserts and that placeholder phenomenon idea. So just talk to us a little bit more about those concepts and why naming and that language is so important, because words are important. But I'd love to hear your
Absolutely.
perspective and how you got there.
Absolutely. So I always try to find a way to memorize things. Like even when I was preparing for licensure and all the different educational experiences I had to make it make sense to me. So in order for it to make sense to me, I would go to music, or I had to have a character in my mind, maybe from a movie, that would say, ah, okay, so that's that helps me to remember what it is that I'm experiencing. So I try to group things and I try to make them easy to remember. The placeholder syndrome, where that came from, is I was working in a diversity desert workspace where, um, in leadership, right? This is the other thing. So people think that, oh, I'm going to hire a bunch of folk that may be part of a vulnerable population, but there's this cutoff. I'm only going to hire them to this level. and no one above is going to look anything like them. And people will then present that as, oh, we're completely diverse. I mean, we support diversity. And you're like, are you preparing that person for the next role? And so what happened is I constantly was in a diversity desert, and it was one after another. I mean, it was probably, I'm going to say three. And in the last probably 6 to 7 years, it was jumping and hopping from one to another. And each of them would perform in this manner that was completely different. Oh, we really want you here. And the moment that I got there came the ghostwriting, the hijacking. You want my work? Let me get that in Word. And I would be like, at first I completely missed it. I was like, okay, you want this in Word. So I had to spend some time with that. Well, you want this in Word so you can take it, reframe it, do whatever you want to do, and take it into the rooms that you don't allow me to enter on purpose, and that you're not going to help me to get into. Because the writing style, I come from an academic background. And so after being hazed for that doctoral degree for like 3 years, I got to a place where I understood, academically what they were looking for.
Yeah.
And so it became this, I want to showcase her talent, but I don't want to give her credit for it. So I'm going to do what I want to do with her work and then present it. And it happened agency after agency after agency. And this is the other thing that I will put out there. You have to learn to navigate that, because I'm human just as anyone else. And it gets to a place where you're like, okay, this is getting a bit ridiculous, right? Like I've let 5 slide. This 6th one is not coming through this door. But you then have to find out, how do I communicate this where I don't get the stereotypical African-American woman in the workplace? She's angry, she's difficult, and all of those negative words that I have heard way too many times. I haven't heard, okay, maybe she just, navigates differently based on what's in her visible book bag, U-Haul behind her, 18-wheeler truck, whatever it is that you got behind you that comes out in the moment, that's the worst possible moment of your life, where you just get fed up. And so it was opportunity after opportunity. And so I got to this place where I was like, no, okay, so I'm gonna start letting people know. So I said, okay, you want this in Word? And so I started calling it out. You want this in Word so that you can take it, hijack it, and make it into your own. The moment I said that, I had to be looking for another job, because it was like, oh no, that is
The
not, I would
audacity.
never do that. Right. And I was like, oh no, I was just pointing it out. And whether I said it respectfully, it didn't matter. And so immediately it got, we don't invite her to meetings. We don't want to hear what she has to say. And when I tell you, for 6 or 7 years, it was back to back to back to back to back. And I said, after reading the book, I was like, okay, if I'm not the only one experiencing this, what do I do with this? And so in came the placeholder. Well, if your playbook doesn't work for me, I'm gonna create my own playbook. Okay. So I'm gonna start looking for employment. So it was employer, I would go on interview after interview. And I realized in my particular area, I've kind of outgrown the area that I'm in, only because the positions I went for, I was completely overqualified for. But I'm not, independently wealthy. So I needed to have a job. And so I would
Not
take the
yet.
job.
Not yet. Because
Yeah.
not
I
yet. I'm
like that,
independently wealthy.
Miss Leah. I
Yeah.
love it. Let's speak it into existence. But I would get interview after interview after interview. And I realized what it was you needed to be able to have your 5 people, or how many ever it is that you need, to
Your
be able to
diverse
say
slate.
that the people, right, have the correct credentials. And I was not being hired. But I would get an interview from the same place, maybe 4 times. And I would be like, okay, this is getting ridiculous.
Yeah.
And people would still expect me to be, smiley and bubbly and polite. And it was like, I didn't do all of this, including all the student loan debt I have, to get to a place where I never thought that I would be in a field of helpers being treated like an outcast. And that truly has been my experience. So if you'll outcast me, why will you not outcast clients?
So important. Oh my gosh. So that is so important, because, and I wanted to make sure we mentioned this. May is Mental Health Awareness Month.
Yes, it
And
is.
when you talked about this experience that so many people are having, and I'm so glad that you're bringing it to light, such an important discussion. So many people are having an experience where their work is being hijacked, where whether it's their words, their projects, their calculations, their drawings, whatever it is, the work product that they're producing is being hijacked. And it's happening consistently, and it's happening from people who are supposed to be supporting them. It may even be happening for people who are their managers, right? Who people they're responsible for. It looks like you may have lost video here, Dr. Mary. So if you can still hear us, stick with us. Are you still there? Oh, I think we lost her. So I'm just going to close it out with this is an important discussion that I feel like a lot of organizations are not acknowledging. So, first, people are experiencing hijacking all the time. Whether you're a junior person who's in your organization, you're new or junior to your organization, and or whether you're well established, right? You're a senior manager, you're a director, and you're writing the decks, you're writing the presentations, you're writing the reports, and then you don't get the opportunity to actually go in the room and present your own work. That is a real thing that's happening in corporate America, academia, it's happening in clinical settings. That hijacking is not you tripping, right? Like I want to give that to people. A lot of times we think, well, am I being unrealistic? Is it unreasonable? There is a time where you have to contribute to work and you have to, play a part. But there's also a time where you should be able to speak to your own work. And if you have a relationship inside your organization where that's never happening, your work is often being hijacked, and potentially there are others in the organization who are benefiting tremendously from the labor that you're putting in. And that is a stressor, right? It's a demotivator. It is definitely a stressor, and it can affect people's mental health, well-being, and compensation. So I'm really glad that you mentioned it and you gave people the language to describe it, because a lot of times we're experiencing these things in workplaces, and I'm hearing this from lots of people on LinkedIn who are sending me specific questions about what they're experiencing in the workplace and looking for help to navigate it. And they may not have the language to describe it, whether it's to their manager, whether it's to other people in the organization. What you've done, I feel like in your chapter, is really give people not only an example where you're saying like, it's me too, you're not alone in these experiences, but secondly, you've given them the language to describe what they may be experiencing in a workplace that allows them to feel like, okay, I'm not tripping. And if I need to explain this to somebody else, now I feel better equipped. I have the language,
Absolutely.
And I'm building up the emotional resilience to be able to use that language in a way that's going to be beneficial to me. So I wanted to ask you, just as we close out, Dr. Mary, what is the most important thing you want people to take away from your chapter? Right? You covered so many important things around authenticity, around, naming people appropriately, titling people, acknowledging people appropriately, diversity deserts. I mean, your chapter is dense, chapter 10, and I loved every minute of it. What is the thing, if you could say, I want to make sure that every reader walks away with this concept or this idea, what would you say it is for your chapter?
So what I would say it is for my chapter, and I speak a lot about this when I do training of people that are, wanting to become therapists, and even to organizations when they have me come and train. If someone responds completely differently to what is a typical experience, the first thing that really should do is it should have you to pause for a moment and explore it. So for instance, one of the first things I do when I open up and I go anywhere is I say, my name is Dr. Mary Darden Robinson, but as long as the doctor is there, and I make a joke about it, as long as the doctor is there, I go by any of those three names, right? So when someone purposely, or let me go back, when someone accidentally does it, it's totally different. Like we talked about that earlier. There's a sense of grace that I'm willing to, to offer there. When you're doing this on purpose, right? It should make you kind of think about it with the way that the person responds. So for me to go through all of that, as long as the doctor is there, I don't care about any of the other things. It should really make you think, why am I even going through having that conversation? And that's coming from a place of really recognizing universal precautions of trauma, just like we would do, if we were in the medical field and someone were bleeding, you always want to make sure you have gloves on, right? So it's that perspective that you want to always just expect that whoever you are talking with, interacting with, has had some level of trauma. And if they respond in a way that is sensitive to what you would think typically someone would ignore, that should be a cause for you, rather than to kind of scrutinize them and immediately come to a place, which I typically get is, oh, she's arrogant. Why is it such a big deal? I wish we would come from a place of compassion and say, as one of my supervisors very early on, Miss Madison told me, what's driving that train? Why would someone go through all of that? So if I spend 3 minutes on that, right,
Mhm.
and giving you an example and sharing some insight, that should already give it to you. And I'm not making it hard for you to figure it out. There
Yeah.
probably is some trauma surrounding just even a name and a prefix. We've got to do better with doing that.
So I love that. And you said pause and explore. I've heard other people describe a similar approach as lead with curiosity,
I
curiosity and
love it.
empathy. So I love this idea of it requires other humans to have a certain level of emotional intelligence and self
Definitely.
awareness. And then I think the other part is once you realize that someone has a bias and someone is doing something intentionally, now at least you can identify them explicitly. Like, okay, I know that this is a problem and this person is going to create an environment that's not conductive, right, for me to be able to be successful. Conducive, I'm sorry, not conductive, conducive for me to be able to be successful. So
Hmm.
the quicker you identify yourself, the easier it is for me to decide how to navigate. So you're saying that you give a 3 minute intro and you let everybody know this is how I want to be titled, this is how I want to be communicated to. And those 10 people who may be on the other side, if 9 of them are like, no problem, Dr. Mary, no problem, Dr. Darden, no problem, Dr. Robinson, right? Pick one of the three.
Good with all
And
of
the
those.
one, all of the above, right? And the one is problematic. Okay, now you've identified yourself as a problem, not
Hmm.
only to me, but to everyone else in this room who is observing you
Hmm.
make this conscious choice to to not respect my wishes, right? To identify me as something that is less than what I've shared with you. So
Hmm.
I just want people to know you are the problem. We see you are the problem. Your peers see you are the problem, and you that's a you problem. That's not a us problem. So I love that you said to pause and explore why people would go into that level
Right.
of effort to make sure that they are appropriately acknowledged. There's something tied to it, and even if you don't know what's tied to it, take the time to say there's a reason behind it. So let me just do my part.
Right.
It costs
Right.
me nothing. It costs me nothing. Let me just do my part and acknowledge them appropriately so all of us can have an environment that is psychologically safe for us in a
And
workplace.
safer. I always say safer because
Safer.
safety
Yeah.
is sketch and it is very subjective depending on who you're talking to.
Mhm.
The other thing I would like to say before we close out, because I know we got to go, is for leadership. Do not be in concert with other people that are trying to keep the motives and agendas of the diversity desert going strong. Because you
Mhm.
being in concert is a whole nother issue. And don't support the person in the background, but then you get in the common area where everyone, is kind of having this negative engagement, and then you want to go
Mm.
with it and then come back to the person and be like, oh yeah, girl, I support you. That's not helping.
Mm, that
You
is
got to
such,
pick a
oh my
lane.
gosh, that is such a good point. Someone said
Hmm.
the other day, one of the other thought leaders that I, have come to really enjoy, and now I can't think about what the video was or what their name is, but if I can find it, I'm going to make sure that to tag them. And they said, apologize to me as publicly as you
Yes.
disrespected me. Acknowledge
Yes.
me, seek forgiveness as publicly, as overtly, as demonstratively as you offended me. And
Hmm.
I think that's something that corporate America never has done, right? Right. And America as a country never has done. But we don't want to get into that because we're now trying to close out and we're about to, pull
Oh,
another
that would
thread.
open it all the way up, Miss Leah. That would look. I got 10 things in the book bag on that one. That would open it all the way up.
That'll pull another thread. But it is very important when someone has been offended and when something is acknowledged as offensive to make sure that the setting and the public acknowledgement of that is
Hmm.
done right. And that's the only way to be able to build trust in
Absolutely.
relationships, in a workplace, in a healthy, in a safer environment, to use your words. Make sure we say in a safer environment. So if you're an employer, you're a leader, you're a manager, you're leading a large organization, to make sure that you, as the leader in that organization,
Hmm.
demonstrate the appropriate behavior means that what is done in the dark needs to be done in the light. And that doesn't mean that everybody can hear everything all the time. We know, we've been in organizations enough to know that there's certain information that's sensitive. But when an offense has been demonstrated and acknowledged, make sure that the acknowledgement and the apology, the correction for that is as public as the offense. That is a rule of thumb that will save lots of hardship, lots of perceptions of lack of equity in your workplace, on your team, in your environment, which inevitably retains people, right? That's how you build trust. So I love that.
Absolutely.
I absolutely love that. Make sure you apologize to me as loud as you offended me, as
Mhm.
publicly as you offended me. Make sure you compensate me appropriately as quickly as you didn't give me the compensation that I deserved.
Miss Leah,
Fill in
cut
the
it
blank.
out. You about to make me pull something else out. Very, very lastly,
We're
always
gonna have a
know
part two. We're gonna
that you
need to have
can
a part
advocate
two.
for yourself. We are, and
Yeah.
never allow folk to get away with it. You matter,
Mm,
and otherwise, you're in the same category as people that are in concert with it. We got to be more
mm,
vocal about it. You cannot just let it, just happen and run rampant like the pink unicorn that travels around the office that I work in. Can't let that go. You gotta
hmm.
you gotta head on directly respond to it and let folk know that you know what it is and let them know how it impacts you.
So on our part two, when we get back together, because now I've already decided it's happening, right? Are you on board? Because I'm on board.
I'm so on board.
I'm
So
on
on
board.
board.
Okay. On our part two, we're gonna start with, we have to acknowledge it, we have to say it out loud, but we're also gonna give people tools to be able to do it in a way that is professional, and also
Absolutely.
strategies. If that doesn't go the way you need it to go, what are the other strategies that you should have in place when you're approaching addressing this kind of behavior? Because I definitely love to call people to action, but I also
Hmm.
want to make sure that people feel like, all right, I'm equipped, I have the right language, I have the right tools, and I know how to approach this. And if it doesn't go well, because we know that people are not always seeking to be equitable, right? That is their
Hmm.
intention. If it doesn't go well, what's the plan? What's the strategy? So I love that. I'm excited for our part two. I'm gonna put it on the calendar. We're gonna figure this out. So
For
thank you
sure.
so
I'm there.
much, Dr. Mary Darden Robinson. You came out here and showed out today, and I absolutely love it. Thank you so much for joining me for the Triumph Together Challenge, week 5. We will be back next Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, streaming on LinkedIn Live as well as on YouTube, with another one of an amazing, amazing, amazing co-anthologist, co-author. So please do join us, and we are looking forward to hearing your comments from this experience. So if this is something that resonated with you or you want to know more, please send us a DM. You can find me on LinkedIn or on my website, gensforthejourney.org. Dr. Mary's information, she is also on LinkedIn. You can get in contact with her. We want to make sure that if there's something more that you were looking for from this conversation, or you want to do a double click, you reach out to us, send us a DM, and we will do a part two, just because we know it's going to be fire on top of fire. So thank you so much, Dr. Mary, and I
Thank
am
you.
excited to be back with you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.